Chapter 1. Betty's heart jammed in her throat and she couldn't breathe. She retreated from the dog catcher's truck. Big dogs didn't frighten her. They were her field of expertise. What the animal control specialist had wasn't a stray canine, though. Thick gray fur, tipped in white, covered the huge unconscious werewolf. I'm so sorry. I didn't know where else to go once I realized what I'd done. Trixie slumped against the vehicle. Sweat stained her one-piece uniform. How the hell did you get him inside all by yourself? Her best friend wiped her brow. Fear, pure unadulterated fear. I can't afford to get fired, Betty. Can you help me? Grab his feet and I'll take his shoulders. Lots of Hollywood movies had confused the general public about shifters. They thought of werewolves as people who could turn into animals, but that wasn't the case. They were a race who could change shape but not as the actual animal. So a werewolf was a mix of man and wolf. They walked on two legs and could talk like they did in human form, except they had fur, sharp teeth, and the face of a wolf. There was no mistaking one for the other, but underneath their skin, no matter the shape, they were still the same person. This was the worst bad idea in the history of bad ideas. A werewolf in her animal rescue? Sure, why not? Maybe she could call his alpha to come adopt him. The giggle that escaped held an edge of hysteria. With a lot of grunting and a few colorful words, they managed to drag the shifter's body into the building. You're lucky he didn't wake up in the truck. Betty rolled the sedated werewolf into her biggest dog kennel and locked the door. It was special made to hold large aggressive dogs, though she doubted it would contain a wolf shifter if he woke and freaked out. She crouched in front of the cage, heart racing. What the fuck, Trixie? I know. Trixie dropped her face into her hands. I'm so fired. The werewolf's mouth hung open, exposing massive teeth, the kind that could gut an animal with one bite. Betty shuddered. She shouldn't, but it had been years since she'd been this close to another shifter. His scent tugged at the hole in her heart, the place where her pack should have been. In the surrounding kennels, the dogs barked louder. Some of the pups chewed on the bars or clawed at the doors. She leaned over to look in the next cage. The three small animals were quiet and pressed together in the far corner. Let's get the place quiet so we don't wake him prematurely. Put the dogs out in the yard so I can hear myself think, Betty shouted as she started releasing the excited dogs from their kennels while Trixie herded them to the exit. Won't your neighbors complain about the noise again? Trixie glanced at the dark windows surrounding Betty's yard. 3-story apartment buildings lined her borders, the only house on the block. The dogs quieted once out in the night air and away from Sleeping Beauty. Inside, they cuddled in a pack on the tall grass. Envy beat in time with her heart and she fought the urge to join them. What were you doing with a tranquilizer gun? Betty elbowed Trixie before returning to her newest guest. They arm us with them in case of emergency. He was running on all fours, chasing 3 dogs down 47th Street. I panicked. Trixie paced the hallway, running her fingers through her fluorescent pink hair. I've never seen a werewolf up close. Next thing I knew, I was holding the tranq gun with a werewolf at my feet. She spun to face Betty. I thought he was a bear. It was dark. Betty could picture the 6 o'clock news. Werewolf goes berserk inside animal rescue. 2 human females found inside his stomach. The rescue needed more publicity, but not this kind. She knelt in front of the cage and stared at the beautiful sleeping beast. Looked vicious, unconscious, barrel-chested and paws the size of dinner plates. He outsized her Great Danes. How much sedative did you give him? Enough for a bear. Trixie met her glare and coughed. Twice. Betty's teeth clicked as she shut her mouth. She didn't. What the oh my god. There's not enough wine in my fridge to make this better. Trixie plopped next to her onto the concrete floor. How angry will he be? How should I know? The adrenaline of being roused at 4 a.m. by a frantic phone call was fading fast. You grew up in a pack. That was in another city. Newport's pack won't even acknowledge my existence. Neither would her old pack. Not since she'd turned 18 and hadn't been able to shift. To them she was human, but her heart still howled at the moon, and those assholes had broken it. The only thing that kept it beating was her dogs and their unconditional love. They didn't care that her mother was human and Betty a half-breed. They both watched the shifter's chest rise and fall in silence. Trixie's eyes were the size of saucers. Are we talking a fine or jail time? I heard Newport's Alpha is a piece of work, even for a wolf shifter. Wolves. We're the worst gossips. We're dead. Yep. Coffee. If Betty was going to have to defend her best friend from a drugged werewolf, she would do it with Java flowing through her veins. Sure, I'll make it. Trixie squeezed her upper arm. Thanks, Betty. I knew I could count on you. She kissed her cheek. Betty patted her hand. Life is never boring with you in it. Who would have thought humans could get in as much trouble as shifters? From Betty's limited experience living among humans, they weren't that different. Trixie grinned. You did say you wanted to spice things up. A change. I meant sex with something other than my dildo. Trixie's cheeks matched her hair. Oh, and she jumped to her feet. I heard. Werewolves were great in bed. Not going there. Werewolves metabolize drugs faster than humans, but she couldn't remember how fast. They had covered it when she had been in high school years ago. She pulled out her cell and Googled for the answer. She could call her dad, the only shifter who still talked to her, but how to explain? That conversation would be a nightmare. He'd almost gone lone wolf when his pack had denied her membership. The loss of being pack would have killed him. Though, she knew firsthand how terribly lonely it was, and she was only a half breed. Google listed 100 links to articles on werewolf metabolism. She started to read them now. She could be finished in a few days. So not helpful. The beast in the cage licked his muzzle yet remained asleep. He would wake up, groggy and disoriented, probably starved. Trixie came back with 2 mugs of steaming coffee. Betty rose and grabbed one. Is Sarah's diner open all night? Yeah. Trixie sounded confused. Pulling out her pocketbook, Betty silently prayed to the loose change gods to be generous tonight. She poured out the contents on her desk in the corner of the room. Coins rattled on the wood. Go buy some burgers. She counted right down to the last penny. There went her tight budget. How much have you got? Trixie was pulling out her coins and pennies too, but at least she had a paying job. Well, for now. Her friend gathered all the money together and hesitated. Are you sure? What if he wakes while I'm gone? What if he wakes while you're here? Not like that would make much of a difference, but burgers will. Okay, be back in a flash. Trixie left at a run. Ken's mouth tasted like roadkill stew. He rolled, running his claws over his eyes, almost blinding himself. He was still in beast form? He tried to stand, but only flopped onto his other side. What had happened? He shook his head to clear his thoughts, managing to spray drool across the wall. Bleary-eyed, he stared at the barred door. His heart drummed. Was he in jail? Again? His father, aka the Alpha, would beat his hide like an old blanket. Survival instincts, fight or flight, triggered his claustrophobia. He jumped to his feet and hit the ceiling with his head, cracking his neck in the process. Other ducker. Whoa, what was wrong with his tongue? Felt too big for his mouth. Wait. He wasn't tall enough to hit his head on the ceiling. The sharp knock cleared his head. Metal walls, small space, smelled like kibble. He wasn't in jail. He was crammed in a dog cage. Rubbing his sore noggin, he tried to recall last night. Running. He'd been playing with his dogs. Strays that he had picked up off the street a few weeks ago. They loved running in the park on 47th Street and, well, so did he. Lots of things to smell and mark. While running as a pack, the group had spooked at something. He had spun around to protect them when he had been stung in the ass. On all fours, he crept forward cautiously. The room smelled of many breeds of dogs, but that didn't hide the scent of a female shifter. He eyed his pixie-sized jailer. Her black hair was pulled into a messy, lopsided ponytail, and she looked like she'd just tumbled out of bed. She wore a sleeveless pajama top revealing colorful tattoos all over her arms. Their gazes met, and the smell of her fear suddenly flooded his cage. He waited for the screaming to start, but silence rang loudly in the room. She slowly knelt in front of him within grabbing range and placed a full glass of water between the bars. Rough night. He barked out a surprised laugh. His ears perked forward. You can say that. He lifted the glass to his muzzle. It smelled clean, and lapped the water. She seemed fascinated. I thought you would go berserk when you woke up. Not your first time, I take it. He choked, coughing repeatedly to clear his airway. Drinking water in beast form? No. But you would think so the way I just inhaled that. He thumped his chest. It was cramped in here. She smiled and the room brightened. I meant waking up behind bars. I had a rough childhood. You have a name. Betty. I'm Ken. You plan on letting me out, Betty, or do I need to pop this tin? Can. He gave it a push and the metal groaned. About that. She dangled a key from her finger. With supernatural speed he snatched it and unlocked his prison. She gasped and Crab walked across the hall until she bumped her head against the cages on the other side. On all fours, he crawled out and didn't knock his already pounding head on the frame. He followed her retreat until he pinned her to the wall. I think this is where you explain why I am waking up in a cage. He could hear her heartbeat like a bird trying to escape her chest. The scent of fear mixed with her smell and spun his head. Shelter, she whispered. The thin material of her night shirt did little to conceal her small breasts as her breathing grew erratic. His body reacted to her scent. The mix of pheromones was like magic for his kind. He licked his muzzle, savoring her taste in the air. Finally, he'd found her. All those fucking Wolfpack mixers he had attended hoping to find his one true mate, and here she was in a wait. Did you say shelter? He took in his surroundings. Other empty animal kennels, cement walls and floors, a messy desk in the corner, stacks of dog and cat food in the opposite corner. How did I end up here? She squirmed away, smoothing the loose strands of hair from her face. Welcome to Almost Home Animal Rescue. I rescued you. He sat with his back to the wall, not trusting his legs yet, and scratched his head. From what? That name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. She cleared her throat. The dog catcher. He jerked as the memory returned. She shot me in the ass with the tranquilizer gun. On rubbery knees he rose, using the wall for guidance. Claws extended. He pointed at her. You have some explaining to do. She's very sorry. The female gave him a pleading look. It was all a misunderstanding. She thought you were a bear. In the city. Well, there was a sleuth of bear shifters living in Newport. But they were on the other side of town. But still, they shouldn't be shot at. Trixie is new to the job and she saw you hunting dogs. Hunting? Those are my dogs and I was playing with them. Now they were loose. Probably scared, or worse, thought he had abandoned them. I have to make a call. What time is it? 4:30 a.m. Damn, she's probably still asleep. He changed to human form and swept his soulmate into his arms. She was compact and tight. So why haven't I met you? At any pack functions. Her eyes were so wide he could see her retinas. You put me down right now or I'm going to rocket your balls into your pancreas. He tilted his head, not understanding her sharp tone. They were soulmates. Couldn't she smell their bond? Was he wrong? The back door slammed open and a pink-haired human stormed inside, armed with a greasy paper bag held in front of her like a detonator. I've got burgers. Don't eat her. Chapter 2. You. Ken spun to face his assailant, shoving his mate behind his back. You're the one who shot me. Who could forget that hair? The pink-haired human tossed the greasy bag at him. Run, Betty. He bared his teeth at her. Not a human gesture and something his alpha discouraged doing to humans, but she had taken him down for no reason. There were laws in place to prevent such misunderstandings. I was within my rights to be in the park. There wasn't any reason to fire on me. He sniffed the bag. Are these from Sarah's diner? Yes, and you're naked. The human female's cheeks colored to match her hair. She stared at the ground, avoiding eye contact. Public nudity was discouraged. Once his alpha was finished beating Ken's hide, he would offer him to the local dragon as a snack. Tossed in a dog pound. He would be the butt of every joke for the next month. This incident couldn't leave this room ever. Laughter bloomed behind him. Betty pulled a blanket out from the kennel he'd been occupying and wrapped it around his hips. Go finish your shift, Trixie. I've got this covered. Like a bomb, her good humor soothed the rage boiling in Ken. The human hesitated, her gaze traveling between them. Are you sure? He's got burgers. All should be forgiven, right? His mate elbowed him in his side. It is. He cocked his head. This hazard in pink couldn't be ignored. Gee, might shoot another shifter. See, we're good, but Trixie, don't touch the tranquilizer gun again. Betty pulled open the bag in his hand and took a burger. His mouth watered. Shifting took a lot of energy and he hadn't eaten since yesterday. Part of him adored how she took care of him, the other part was wary how easily she just manipulated the situation. He plucked a burger from his mate's hand. Forgiven, but if it happens again, I'll report your human to my alpha. He grinned, showing all his teeth. Not the authorities. Trust me, he's not the forgiving type. His father was more of a tooth for a tooth. Wolf shifter. The pink-haired human visibly swallowed. I've learned my lesson. She backed out of the rescue and closed the door behind her. So? The female shifter backed away to her desk. Who do you need to call for? A ride. He narrowed his eyes, biting the burger in half. Oh, that was good. Want one? He spoke with his mouth full. Just couldn't be helped, he was that hungry. She held her cell phone. I'm fine. She seemed determined for him to leave. He didn't understand. They had just met. He'd been told things went better than being tossed a burger when soulmates found each other. Like, why was she still wearing clothes? Scratching his head, he took the phone. His dogs were still running free to terrorize the city. At this hour, he could think of only one person to call. On the third ring, she answered tentatively. Beth, it's Ken. This a new number? She sounded half asleep. It's a number you can use to reach me. He chuckled at Betty's frown. My dogs are loose and I need you to find them. Beth groaned. As Pac Omega, she wouldn't say no. No. Call someone else to catch your mangy mutts. He growled. You do realize I rank higher than you. That meant he was more dominant in pack order. I have a situation I have to take care of. Beth made kissy noises. What's her name? He ground his teeth. He didn't believe in bullying his weaker packmates around, which was why Beth was comfortable teasing him. Normally this pleased him, but not tonight. He needed to figure out his mate's lack of interest, and he wouldn't leave this rescue without an answer. My dogs are all alone and possibly scared. Beth pretended not to like his pets, but guess who baked them homemade biscuits? Can you gather them before they get hurt? Fine, she dragged out the word. But you. He hung up and turned his full attention on Betty. And you, he pointed, never answered my question. Why haven't we met if you live in Newport? There was no way his alpha would tolerate a lone wolf in his territory, even if female. I'm not invited to pack functions. She leaned toward him, eyes sparkling with dark mischief. The more time he spent with her, the more intrigued he grew. What could you have possibly done to be banned? Are you a bad wolf? He half joked. They all had weaknesses and his apparently was a tattooed, pixie-sized werewolf. Because I am considered human. Betty smelled of truth. Shifters could smell lies, and she honestly believed she was human. He recalled what had happened to his best friend, Angie. She had thought she was human with a little shifter blood. Turned out she was a cursed full-blooded dragon. Opening his mouth, he inhaled deep and tasted Betty's scent. He had been drugged, so maybe his senses were off and he had made a mistake? Soulmates couldn't be human. It was impossible. They just didn't have the biology. She busied with dog bowls, filling them with kibble. Not many shifters bother with pets. It wasn't intentional. They were strays and starving. The nose knew things. And smells didn't lie. He wasn't wrong. She belonged to him. No doubt about it. I fed them and eventually caught their fleas. She snorted. It's not funny. They itch like mad and crawl through your fur at night like ghost fingers. He shuddered. If I had to take a flea bath, then so did they. Then they never left my home. Leaning against the door frame, she eyed Ken as if seeing him for the first time. Her gaze caressed his flesh and he couldn't help but flex. That's a nice story. What's your story, Betty? Because you definitely hit my radar as a werewolf. That's not surprising. Many had claimed the same thing back home, yet Pack law still declared her as human. I'm a half-breed. My father is a wolf. Shifter in the Riverbend pack. He raised an eyebrow. And your mother? Human. If her mother had been a different type of shifter, Betty would have been able to shape change into one type of animal or the other. There were no tiger-wolf hybrids, Tilf? Woger. She shook the disturbing images from her head. With her parents, that meant she was either human or not. Voila. It sucked to be her because inside she yearned for Pack, but was denied it. Oh. Ken paled. His shoulders slumped and he set his half-eaten burger aside. Maybe the tranquilizers had made him sick. Do you need to lie down? Because if he fainted, she couldn't catch him. Gee. been raised as a pack child and knew shifters better than humans. Ken was tall, at least 6.5 feet, shoulders like a linebacker and sculpted, with lean muscles. Very pretty, too pretty, probably had a girlfriend in every Newport neighborhood. You never shifted? Old wound she'd thought healed ripped open once more. She didn't want to stroll down nightmare lane. No, and at 18 the pack kicked me out. Happy. He strode across the space separating them and grasped her in a bear hug. Her face pressed to his lower chest since she was cursed with her mother's lack of height. Her bones creaked. Not one bit. He stroked her hair. She pushed against him, his skin warm, his body hard, but she might as well have been caught in a werewolf version of a Chinese finger trap. The harder she shoved, the more he hugged until she was breathless. Fine. She patted his back. Werewolves could be such sensitive mush heads. About weird things. This is my problem, not yours. I'm over it, Ken. I've moved on. He took a deep, shaky breath. It's my problem, too. He bent almost in half to rest his face on top of her head. You're my soulmate, Betty. Can you even send? Chapter 3. Betty's heart turned into lead and sank to her gut. His soulmate? The drugs had done some job on Ken's head. She was going to kill Trixie. Shifters. Metabolism's being fast, he should process this soon. He'd better, because Betty wasn't hearing any wedding bells. Let go. She squirmed to escape his hot grasp with no result. Her heart thudded against her chest. Her flesh tingled with electric charge wherever their flesh met. I'll never let you go. I've spent years searching for you. I meant stop hugging me. I'm sweaty and stink and I haven't had a shower yet. He lifted her chin so their gazes locked. His bright golden eyes shone with inner moonlight, drawing her in like a trap. I don't care, he whispered. I love your scent. Then he bent to kiss her. She covered her mouth with her hand. Sexy guy, half naked in her home, wanting to kiss her, and she was acting as if men were waiting in line outside her home for a date. Was she nuts pushing him away? But Ken wanted more than to wrinkle her sheets. He wanted forever, and she didn't even know his last name. Shifters fell in love fast. She'd seen it happen time again when she'd lived in the pack, but never within seconds. His lips brushed her knuckles and his eyes popped open. He let her go, finally, setting his hands on his hips. I never pictured this moment going so poorly. Betty locked her knees before she sank to the floor. Oh dear, she was in deep trouble. Look, she gasped. Trixie pumped 2 darts full of tranquilizers in your ass just an hour ago. Maybe you should eat and let your system clear before proclaiming your undying love. Okay. Betty pushed him toward her desk and his cooling food. I feel fine. Yet he still sat on her old wooden swivel chair. It groaned under his weight, and he dug into the food with a shifter's determination. Food was almost a religion for their kind, his kind. She liked to eat and had inherited her father's metabolism, but she'd never experienced the euphoria she witnessed at mealtimes as she'd grown up in the pack. The kind on Ken's face at present. Her mom and she would usually chat with other humans. But any shifters at the table ate in silence, savoring each bite. Another sign that Betty truly didn't belong among a wolf pack. Her mother was a sous chef at Bonhomme, a French restaurant in Riverbend, so they always had guests. Her parents weren't soulmates. Didn't mean they weren't in love. Mom had stolen her father's heart through his stomach, but Betty knew secretly Mom dreaded he'd find his true soulmate one day and leave. It had happened before within the pack. The call of one's soulmate couldn't be denied. Past relationships seemed to dissolve in seconds. Ken gobbled 3 burgers before slowing. Are you sure you don't want one? Pulling a wrapped one from the bag, he extended his hand. Eat. Taking food from shifters was a tricky thing. It was part of the mating ritual. Feeding one another was a promise of love. The act only had meaning if the shifters were in a relationship. If Ken hadn't declared her his mate, she wouldn't have hesitated and taken the burger. He could misinterpret her actions as acceptance. Or she could just be overthinking things like usual. The sweet smell of greasy burger reached her senses and her stomach growled so loud it hurt. Fingers brushed paper as she reached for his offered meal. Holy crap, what was she doing? She jerked her hand away from his secretive smile. He knew exactly what he'd been doing. Tempting fate. He wasn't just shifter good-looking but predator smart. Male shifters usually fit in one category or the other. The ones who were in both usually ranked high in the pack. With a racing heart she retreated. I'm going to let the dogs in from the yard. You mind? The animals were still quiet outside. He nodded, resting his elbows on her desk, legs splayed out in front of him. His gaze never left her as she crossed to the door leading to her huge fenced-in yard. The dogs entered tentatively, not barking, heads held low, and went to their respective kennels to eat. She rubbed her eyes. Breakfast time was celebrated. Every morning with barks and kisses, not sullen silence. Her Great Dane stayed at her side though, feet shifting and ears held back. Her dog, the only one not up for adoption, gave Ken a nervous growl. The canines knew who was the biggest predator in the room. She stroked Peanut's head. Easy girl. Go eat. Betty nudged her toward her bowl in the corner of the room. She's beautiful. He admired Peanut's gray-spotted coat, then offered Betty the burger again with a wink. No strings attached. She couldn't stop her smile. She'd spent too much time with dogs and not enough with men, so she had no defense to Ken's charm. The flutter in her stomach would fade once she ate. She could only afford one meal a day, and it was silly to reject the burger she'd paid for. The first bite was greasy heaven. Cheese and bacon and all those artery clogging things humans worried about. Maybe she should too? It was difficult to think of herself as human since she'd been raised as a shifter. Part of her still wanted to believe she was. Betty usually ate yogurt for breakfast. Was cheap protein. Funds were tight and meat was expensive. Pet stores usually donated dog food to the shelter, but she couldn't exist on kibble. The old building was low rent since it was a piece of crap in a bad neighborhood. She was terrible at fundraising, so most of her income came from homemade shampoos, bath bombs, and soap for both people and animals. Online shoppers for the win. Feeling better? She asked him. Clearer head. Sure. He still watched her with a hunger that had nothing to do with the breakfast in her hand. If you think food will cure the fact that you're my soulmate, you'll be disappointed. Fuck. She tossed the last bits of her breakfast to Peanut, who caught it like an airborne shark. Am I that horrifying? He gestured to his gorgeous body. No, she rubbed her temples, trying to ease the pounding in her head. I've got to feed the cats. He jumped to his feet. I'll help. No, she pressed her hand to his chest. They'll flip out with a wolf in the room. Bad enough my dogs are terrified of you. She pointed to the kennels and the church-like behavior of her usually rambunctious animals. I'm not in the mood to be clawed by a room full of stressed-out cats. They're not terrified of you? Human, remember? She strode toward the exit of the canine section, but he dogged her every step. How was she going to fix this soulmating thing? Her dad might know what to do. She'd have to call him, since she didn't have any shifter friends. She had made a clean break from everyone in Riverbend except family. It hurt too much. Otherwise, not to mention her friends would gossip. The last thing she needed was the alpha of Riverbend pack to learn someone was trying to claim her. Shifters were very traditional when it came to soulmates, and she suspected no one would be happy about Ken's drugged-up instincts. Why don't you believe me? You smell like wolf. You smell like mine. She growled and stopped him with a hand to his chest, then slammed the door in his face. Then she crossed to the other side of the rescue where she housed the cats and slowly crept inside their sanctuary. The room was filled with floor-to-ceiling scratch posts and cushions. She only had 6 feline guests, and they eyed her like an errant servant when she entered. Okay, so they didn't love her, but the cats didn't try to claw out her eyes either. Not like they did her father when he visited. He still had scars. Now there was the shifter he'd smelled. Ken grinned at the closed door. What? An adorable growl. He wanted to toss her over his shoulder and take her. He scratched his chin. Well, damn, he didn't have a car or a stitch of clothes to wear. They couldn't go anywhere. Humans frowned upon public nudity and placed laws against shifters running around naked. Up until now, he'd been thinking with his hormones and not his head. No wonder she'd pushed him away. He exited the dog kennel area into what appeared to be a front lobby. This must be where the public entered the building. Not the best place for him to wander around. He didn't need a stranger finding him here in all his glory. A news article about indecent exposure at an animal rescue would be the death of him. Following Betty's scent, he found a back staircase. At the top he entered what must be her living space. He halted at the threshold. It was small. The whole apartment could fit in his master bedroom. The cracks on the walls were the only decoration. Small window over the kitchen sink let in a bit of sunlight. He walked on the uneven flooring, the worn wood creaking under his weight. Small kitchen with the bare essentials, fridge, stove, sink, all appeared to be from the 70s. He peeked inside her fridge and found yogurt. That was it. He frowned and strode across the narrow living room, which held a sagging sofa and ancient television, to her bedroom. A twin bed with her blankets on the floor. Her laundry sat in a pile in the corner by the closet, where he searched for something that might fit. It would take a miracle. He was at least a foot taller. Maybe a robe or yoga pants. She didn't seem the yoga type, full of fire and pent-up anger. He held up a pair of jeans to his hips. This was ridiculous. He dropped them and searched her closet. In the back, he found a pair of black track pants and a white t-shirt his size. For a minute, he'd been worried he would be forced to wear a towel home. Wait, why did she have men's clothes in her closet? He sniffed them and snarled. Of all things he'd been expecting to find, he wasn't prepared for this smell. First, his soulmate had been suffering in poverty all this time, when he could have been helping her, and now this. What do you think you're doing? Betty stood in the doorway, arms crossed and eyes blazing. He hadn't heard her steps. Either she was good on a hunt or he had been too engrossed in the scent of another male. Claws of rage tore at his heart and he could barely breathe. He held out the clothes. You have a boyfriend? The windows rattled from the volume of his shout and a dog howled below them. She winced. He inhaled slow and deep. He hadn't meant to yell, but clearly from the scent, her boyfriend was a wolf shifter. Ken would have to challenge him if he didn't back away. That ends today. He jerked on the clothes to obliterate the other males' smell, and they were the only things that would fit Ken. His gaze moved to her bed. They would burn that as well. Would you like to pee on my leg? She batted her eyelashes. This isn't a joke. He strode across the short distance separating them. Her stormy expression vanished. With wide eyes she retreated until her back hit the wall. He leaned his hands on the wall, trapping her between them. It wasn't that uncommon when mates found each other that one or the other would be involved in another relationship. He'd always felt sorry for the person who was suddenly dumped. Not this time. This male would no longer be allowed anywhere near Betty. Better yet, Ken would make sure he transferred to another pack. That belongs to. She tried to explain, but he pressed his lips to hers, scooped her into his arms as he explored her rosebud mouth. He would make her forget that other men existed. She slapped at his shoulders. Then slowly her attacks turned into caresses, until she tangled her fingers in his hair. Her grip tightened, the sharp pain on his scalp more intense, and then she yanked. Ow! He clasped the back of his head and dropped the small she-devil who was holding strands of his short hair between her fingers. Those clothes belong to my dad, asshole. She swung her leg and kicked him in the shin. Hey! He jumped clear of the next one. She limped to her bed. He forgot them on his last visit. Oh my God, I think your werewolf bones broke my toe. She sat on the edge of her mattress and clasped her foot, rocking back and forth. He knelt before her. Let me look. He pried her fingers open. This had to be the worst mating meetup in the history of their people. Where was the heat? The love? The sex? He seized her little foot, which fit in his palm. Can you wiggle them? They didn't look broken, and he breathed a sigh of relief. She flexed them and grimaced. Yeah. She smacked the side of his head. Jerk. Then yanked her foot from his hold. He dropped his head, resting his arms on his bent knees as he remained squatting in front of her. It's time for you to go. Look, we started things on the wrong foot. Pun intended. He raised his head and caught her glare. She might claim not to be a shifter, but she sure acted like one, especially when meeting his gaze. Me drugged. You cranky. She snarled. He hid his grin behind a cough. She sure communicated like a werewolf too. Maybe we should try to start over. He held out his hand. Ken Birch, head of the Newport PAC's Finance and Investment Department. Finance and Investment. The one and only. Sounds exciting. She eyed his hand as if it was a trap, then gingerly shook. Betty Newman, sole owner of Almost Home Rescue. See, we can be civil. The silence stretched and he cleared his throat. So.
No boyfriend.
No, she snapped. Her stare wandered from his, focusing on the wall behind him. You. No boyfriend either. She scowled. You know what I mean. No girlfriend. Lovers, yes, but not anymore. He resisted touching her, wanting to caress her thighs, pull her onto his lap, nip the tip of her nose. She wasn't ready. That was clear. She crossed her arms. So you're an investor. That explains the hairstyle. He ran his hands over his short hair. What's wrong with it? Nothing. It's just very professional looking. He leaned forward, setting his hands on the mattress. I'm very serious about what I smelled, Betty. You're my soulmate, no matter how much you deny it. That won't change things. With her fingertips she traced his cheeks, his chin, his jaw. She inhaled, then shook her head. I'm not sure what to smell for. I must have missed the class on soulmates in shifter school. He chuckled, relieved that she had a sense of humor behind all that rage. That doesn't mean it's not there. It also means I'm not going to tear off my clothes and ride you like a cowgirl. The image sent a shiver down his spine. Yet, the promise was clear in his voice. He didn't know how he'd do it, but Betty would be. Chapter 4. Dressed in Betty's father's clothes, Ken followed her to the kitchen where she served him coffee. They sat at her table, bathed in morning sunlight, reflected off her midnight hair, making it appear made of liquid. She snapped her fingers in front of his face. Did you hear anything I just said? He cleared his throat and sat up straighter. I was thinking. More like mesmerized. He'd heard that the initial mating call would be intense, strong. Emotions overrode his brain, leaving him at a disadvantage since Betty seemed to feel nothing but annoyed. No amount of wishing changed the fact that she just wasn't sensing their bond. However, that didn't mean his nose was wrong. They were meant to be together. He'd just have to convince her the old-fashioned way. I asked if you needed to use my phone to call for a ride home, and be forced to admit that I was bagged and tagged by an amateur dog catcher? I think not. They wouldn't know that unless you told them. Why else would I be here? She frowned and gestured to herself. Me. He gave her the full force of a slow grin and wove their fingers together. Okay. She yanked free. First, we need to come to some sort of understanding. I'm not looking for a mate. She jumped to her feet and paced the small kitchen. I mean, I left the pack life. If we'd met a few years ago, I probably would give this whole thing my best try. Pausing by the sink, she rested her forehead in her hand. You're not going to leave me alone, are you? He sipped the coffee. It was paint remover strong, just how he liked it. Nope. Her shoulders slumped. Is that so bad? He set his cup aside, fighting the urge to gather her in his arms. So far, she'd responded to all his touches with violence. I don't know you. True, but you will. What are you really worried about? Her rejections were too reactive. She wasn't even giving him a chance. She tossed him a wide-eyed stare. What will your pack think? He blinked. He hadn't thought beyond the two of them. There are shifters who are in relationships with humans. My alpha doesn't object. But are any soulmate? No, they're human. He tilted his head, finally understanding. You're worried they'll reject you because you can't shift. They'll treat me like a human. I can't go through that again, Ken. It hurts so much leaving my birth pack. They tore out my heart and stomped on it. I might not be full-blooded, but I'm shifter enough to need a pack. You're making a lot of assumptions without ever meeting any of my pack. She crossed her arms. I don't have to meet them. What matters is what your alpha says. He hated to admit it, but she was right. Packs followed their alpha's example. His alpha happened to also be his dad. His adopted dad. Why don't we concentrate on us and let me handle the alpha? This rule of being able to shift was archaic. Betty contained enough shifter blood to act and smell like a werewolf. That should be enough. No, her chin took on a stubborn stance, but her eyes sparkled with unshed tears. He wanted to jump in his car and drive to Riverbend and kick her old alphas. As for hurting her so bad, kicking her out of the pack? That was like family cutting you off. He touched his t-shirt. At least her father visited. That must have been so hard on her parents. Human spouses lived on the fringe of pack life. They had some benefits of pack life and came to events with their spouses, but it ended there. They weren't pack. Never could be. Humans couldn't feel the pack bond. As a child of a union between human and wolf shifter, Betty would have been raised as full-blooded, given until her 18th birthday to shapeshift. After that, she either married into the pack as a human spouse or left. That was pack law. But Betty had shifter blood in her veins. Unlike humans, she felt the pack bond. She didn't belong in either world. He'd never really thought about those half-bloods that left pack life. Maybe it was time he did. He crossed the kitchen and lifted that stubborn chin so their gazes met. Give me a chance. One date. She bit her bottom lip. What if you like me? She laughed. That's what I'm afraid of. The sadness never left her eyes. See, we're making progress. Were they? Not an hour ago you were threatening to introduce my testicles to my pancreas. She laughed again. Fine. One date. The acceptance stunned Betty as it slipped past her tongue. One moment she was hell-bent on sending Ken home and the next they were going on a date. What had happened? Her cell phone rang and she jumped. Fumbling it from her pocket, she was thankful for the distraction. Ken kept twisting her thoughts, and the next thing she knew, she was agreeing to things she hadn't intended to. Hello, she answered the call. Hi, this is Beth. Are you Ken's new girlfriend? The girl on the line sounded bubbly and full of sweetness like cotton candy. The hairs on the back of Betty's neck rose. What if I am? What part did Beth play in Ken's life? He'd said he wasn't involved with another woman. A wolf. Like him, handsome and charming, didn't live a lonely life. Was she one of his groupies? A low growl rolled in Betty's chest. Easy, sweetie. We're just friends. I'm the Pack Omega and apparently Ken's slave. Can I speak with him? Betty fought the urge to disconnect. She didn't like the familiar way Beth said Ken's name. Then she saw his smug look. Of course he could hear their conversation with his shifter hearing. She shoved the phone at him. Hi Beth, did you find my dogs? No, I don't treat you like a slave. After the chaos of this morning, Betty had forgotten his pets were loose on the street. She ran her fingers through her hair, wanting to pull the strands. In frustration. Yes, Ken was attractive and proving himself to be quite charming and one hell of a kisser, but she wasn't looking for Mr. Perfect. She was still trying to figure out who she was outside her pack as a human. How could she do that with a shifter boyfriend? That's great, he continued. Did you put them in the house? Beth had keys to his home? That ended now. Betty mentally gasped at that reaction and moved away from Ken to clear her head. Had she just growled at a stranger on the phone? She stepped into the living room and sank onto the couch, missed, and ended up sitting on the floor, back leaning against the cushion. This was terrible. Shifters dreamed of finding their soulmates. Most never did. She should be overjoyed. Ken seemed nice and was hot. Instead, her heart wouldn't stop racing and her palms were clammy. The fact she'd be tied to a pack forever as an outsider. She'd left the Riverbend pack because she didn't want that kind of life. Newport was a fresh start where she could explore being human, and it turned out that it wasn't that bad as long as she was surrounded by dogs and human friends. Ken had just thrown a wrench in her plans. He peeked around the kitchen doorway, phone still pressed to his ear. I need a ride. I'm at Almost Home Animal Rescue. He paused. I'm not sure. Google the address. She could hear Beth yelling from where she sat. He winked at Betty and held the phone from his ear. For a dominant wolf, he was quite patient with the other shifter. Where in the pack hierarchy did Ken land? Use the GPS. He hung up and sat cross-legged in front of Betty. You're pale. Do you need more food? Typical shifter fix-all. Food. The gesture was almost comforting in an old, familiar way. Her dad would have said the exact same thing. I'm fine. It's been a busy morning. She had carried an unconscious shifter into a kennel, gotten assaulted by said shifter, and then bonded for life. Not a typical start to her day. Some wolves in my old pack would have torn any Omega into confetti if they yelled. She shuddered at the memories. Beth is our only Omega. She's spoiled. Only one. Most packs carried more. Omegas didn't care about pack rank or dominance. They were the heartbeat, the fun, the unity that wolves craved. Without an Omega, most packs dissolved into chaos. Yeah, we're working on recruiting more. Ken shrugged. No one else would Dare speak to me that way. Betty wanted to shake him. If she's your only Omega, why send her for your dogs? She needed to know how deep this relationship went. Why did Beth have a key to his fucking home? She's the only one who they're not afraid of. They'll come when she calls. Oh. Still didn't answer her burning question. She took a deep breath and held her chin high. He raised his eyebrow. Are you a little bit jealous? In your dreams. She just totally lied to a shifter who could smell it. He looked too pleased with himself as he caressed her cheek. You know what? Would have been disappointed if you had stripped and rode me like a cowgirl. This is much more fun. A blush sizzled across her cheeks, setting her face on fire. She was in deep shit without a shovel. I'm going to savor every minute of this hunt. He brushed his thumb over her lips feather light. His touch tingled in such delicious ways. She closed her eyes and leaned toward him for a more intimate kiss. A horn blared outside, sending her dogs below her apartment into a fit of barking. Ken jumped to his feet. I'll pick you up at 6 tonight. Wear something sexy. Then he was gone from her apartment, leaving her breathless and without so much as a goodbye kiss. She folded in half, her cheek resting on the old wooden floor. He had left her phone next to her and she dialed. On the other end, her dad answered. He sounded half asleep. Daddy, please tell me there's a cure for soulmates. Chapter 5. Why would you want to cure that? Betty's father cleared his throat. What time is it? Pumpkin, it's not even 7 a.m. What are we talking about? He grunted as if getting out of bed. She heard her mom mumble something in the background. Go back to sleep. He spoke to Mom, not to her. Sounds like a shifter thing. I'll take care of it. Dad. I'm here. Let me turn on the coffee maker. More shuffling noises. She found comfort in all these familiar sounds. Her parents weren't morning people. Both worked evening jobs, her mother at the restaurant and her father a security guard. Okay, go. Something about soulmates. Can a person reject their soulmate? I mean, is there a way to stop it? Why would they? He yawned. Finding your mate is supposed to be the best thing to happen to a shifter. Your perfect match. A happily ever after. For a shifter. She let that statement hang because that was the crux of her problem. Was she or wasn't she a shifter? Do shifters find their mates outside their race? Like a human? She thought. She'd known the answer, then this had happened. Silence answered her. She heard the ring of the coffee maker finishing in the background. Dad. Had he fallen asleep? Who are we talking about, Pumpkin? Her stomach hurt, twisting in knots. Me. You found your soulmate? His voice rose and he suddenly sounded wide awake. He found me. She wiped a tear from her eye before it spilled down her cheek. It's a long story. She hated the way her voice shook. It wasn't fear. Well, not really. She wasn't afraid of Ken. Just what he represented. I have all day. Start at the beginning. Oh wait, your mother wants to listen. He placed her on speakerphone. Mom must have heard him shouting about her finding a soulmate. Betty could hear her mother cooking breakfast while Betty gave them the details, leaving out the kissing parts because they were her parents. Though they were miles and miles away, the conversation felt like home, sitting on her worn living room floor, pouring out her heart. She missed them so much it left her hollow at times. Did you smell the mating bond though? Dad asked around a mouthful. No, her sense of smell was better than humans, but much less than a full-blooded shifter. To be honest, the place smells of dog and burgers. I might have mistaken the mating scent for something else. I was kind of worried about being eaten at the time. So he could be lying, ouch. The sound of her mom smacking him upside the head made Betty grin. He could be. She can't always smell a lie. Dad sounded defensive. Don't listen to your father. He's being a father. There's more to soulmates than smell. Remember the Canellis down the street? They're soulmates. Brought over a plate of cookies when they first moved into the neighborhood. George said they were the best cookies he ever had, and the next thing I knew, Martha had me by the throat. Mom had never told her that story. Your father wanted to press charges, but the alpha stepped in and explained that the newly mated pair were hormonal the first few months. Hormonal. Who? That was her mother's way of saying horny. You know what I mean. Wait, are you asking me if I'm hormonal? The blushing returned with forest fire intensity. Betty was close to her mother. but not that open about her sex life. Where was an earthquake when she wanted the ground to swallow her whole? That's it. We're on our way, her father announced. Betty sat up straight. No, it's fine. Don't do that. The last time her father had visited, he'd adopted one of her dogs without permission from either her or her mother. Every time he came, he left with another canine brother. Her mother was ready to build him a permanent doghouse in the yard and make him live there. What had she done? He had also pissed on the borders of her lawn, marking the territory, just in case any single male shifters came sniffing around. It had taken Betty days to wash the stink away with a borrowed hose. This behavior was pre-mating Ken. Let me take care of this. She couldn't imagine what her father would do, but whatever it was, pissing off the Newport pack would mean trouble for Dad with his own alpha. Pack politics sucked. Cross-pack politics were deadly. Her father was low enough on the totem pole of pack hierarchy that he could visit her with just a phone call to the Newport pack office. The higher up the chain of power, the more difficult it was to travel. No hormonal werewolf is going to touch my pup, claiming to be her soulmate, without verification if it's true. That's final. He hung up on her. She snapped her mouth shut as she stared at her cell phone screen. Wow, she'd thought things were bad 5 minutes ago. Could she rent a time machine to stop herself from ever making that call? In a daze, she shuffled back to the kitchen. The burger and coffee and stress were developing into a stomach acids version of the perfect storm. Digging through her cupboards, she finally found her antacids and chased them down. With cold coffee, she pinched her arm and flinched. Nope, not a nightmare. She knew her dad. Army wouldn't stop him once he made up his mind. The only one who could talk sense into him was his alpha, and she wasn't touching that rat's nest of trouble with a 10-foot pole. Some things were just better left in the past and forgotten. Chris, Riverbend's alpha, hadn't been the alpha who declared she wasn't a shifter. Chris was her high school boyfriend who had killed that alpha. He didn't talk things through with shifters like Ken had done with Beth. Ordering shifters around was more Chris's style. He had the power to threaten the pack and follow through on those threats. Betty understood that sometimes this was needed to keep certain wolves under control, and Chris liked control. She'd known that firsthand when they had dated. Leaving Riverbend meant leaving her family, but it also meant escaping Chris. So no calling ex-boyfriends about new ones. Not even to stop her parents from barging into her life. Down in the kennel, the dogs barked. They needed their walks. Luckily, she partnered with a retirement community down the block that didn't allow pets. Many of the residents volunteered at her rescue. Otherwise, she'd never have time to make her soaps and shampoos. She descended to let the dogs outside to play in smaller, more manageable groups, then sat at her desk to sort through yesterday's mail. Orphanage fundraiser. Electric, water, and phone bills joined the fundraiser. In the recycle bin. Maybe she should look for a job and catch up on bills before her utilities were turned off. A notice from her landlord again. She held it at arm's length. The rent had been paid, so what could this be? Money was super tight. She eyed the bin filled with bills and unwanted ads, then turned her attention back to the landlord's letter. This was the third one in a month. Maybe she should read it first. With a heavy heart, she tore it open. Hate to inform you, building sold 3 months ago. Eviction process 2 weeks. To move out. She stared at the letter of doom, unable to move. Whose grave had she pissed on for such terrible luck in one fucking morning? Finally, the need for oxygen kicked in and she breathed in and out. The tight panic in her chest made it difficult. 2 weeks. She pushed herself onto her feet and zombie walked to the back room, then crawled into Peanut's kennel with a blanket. 2 weeks. The Great Dane spooned her, resting her head on Betty's shoulder. The dog gave her a reassuring lick on the cheek. No matter what, she could count on her dogs having faith in her even when she didn't have any left in herself. This was how Trixie found her. Her best friend knelt by the open cage door. I tried calling you, but you weren't answering the phone. I came by to make sure the werewolf hadn't eaten you. She waited, playing with Betty's toes sticking out of the blanket. Are you mad at me?
No.
Then what's wrong? The werewolf wants to marry me. Trixie laughed. It faded when Betty didn't join her. For real. He claims we're soulmates. But I thought that. Trixie cleared her throat. Can he do that even though your old pack declared you human? Her friend knew about her painful past. Trixie tiptoed around the subject. Apparently. Betty squirmed. Trixie's touch was tickling her. My parents are on their way to meet him. Oh. She stopped touching Betty's feet. That's bad. She handed Trixie the letter of doom. My landlord is evicting me. I have 2 weeks to move out. Saying her problems out loud made it feel more real. She had thought Ken was the worst of them, but now he was the least of her worries. He can't force you out. Where's your lease? Betty buried her head deeper under the blanket. You have a lease, right? She grabbed Betty's ankle and pulled her out of the kennel. Right. Trixie hovered over her face. It was a month-to-month agreement. I thought I was protecting myself by doing it this way so I wouldn't be trapped in this dump if I ever found enough funds for a better home. Now all she wanted was to keep this scrap heap. Maybe you can make a deal with the new owners? She sat up. That's a great idea. Maybe I can at least get them to extend the eviction for a few more weeks. Jumping to her feet, she pulled the notice out of Trixie's hand. The buyer is some kind of corporation. Kenichi Inc. Ever hear of it? No. Trixie swiped at her cell phone. But I'm calling them. What? Betty spun around. Hello. This is Miss Newman's personal assistant from the Almost Home Rescue. I'd like to make an appointment with whoever is taking care of the purchase of her property. She gestured for a pen and paper as she gave them the rescue's address. Betty fumbled through her messy desk and gave Trixie an old envelope and a crayon. Mr. Callahan, Friday at 9 a.m. Thank you. Trixie grinned. There's one. Problem solved. Now let's make wedding plans. She grasped Betty's hands, her cheeks flushed with excitement. You have to name your first puppy after me. That's not funny. Betty yanked her hands free. He's moving way too fast. Need to catch my breath. He makes you breathless? And possessive and cray-cray. She pulled her hair, then blinked in stunned silence. She was turning into her mother. She'd heard her say and do the same thing about her father. Betty dropped her arms. We have our first date tonight. Trixie tugged Betty upstairs to her apartment. What had he thought of her living conditions? He hadn't said a thing about the plastic over her broken window or the hole in her bedroom floor. Standing in front of the closet, Trixie asked, Where is he taking you? I didn't ask. She made a frustrated noise. How are you supposed to know what to wear? He had said for her to wear something sexy, but Betty kept that to herself. Something sexy, Trixie said as if reading her mind. Her friend somehow did that occasionally but never seemed to notice. She attacked Betty's wardrobe with no mercy. Do you own anything without dog slobber stains? Betty chuckled. Most of her clothes were of the jean or track pants variety. Maybe she owned a sundress. She wasn't sure if she had packed it when she moved. Ha! Trixie sounded triumphant and pulled out a pair of high heels she'd worn to a wedding a year ago. Where's the outfit to match the shoes? I borrowed a dress from Kim, one of their mutual friends. Trixie dropped the shoes. This will be a group effort then. She tapped at her phone and Betty's dinged. She read the group text Trixie just sent out to their girlfriends. Betty makeover now. Hot date. 911. Hot date? You think he's hot? Betty knew she did. Dudette, I saw him naked. Once we're done with you, you'll be getting a piece of that. Chapter 6. Ken sat in the passenger seat of Beth's car. You smell like dog. Is your girlfriend a dog? Beth eyed his outfit. That's another male shifter's clothes. Is it a male dog shifter?
Elisabeth Louise Gartner.
First, I just spent the morning in a dog rescue. He counted off his fingers. Second, don't call Betty a dog. Ever. Third, these are her dad's clothes and he's not a dog shifter. So she still lives with her parents. She assessed the old house with the rusty chain link fence and crooked windows through the windshield. I don't have to explain myself to you. Drive. Yes, Beta sir. Her voice sounded meek, but it was pretend. He knew when Beth was frightened. This wasn't it. She peeled down the quiet street. He closed his eyes. The Beta job would be easier if it just meant he could crack heads, but Ryota didn't approve of violence unless it was truly merited. The Alpha had plans for their pack. Good plans once Ken approved and believed in. That meant he had to take an active role in those plans, like work for Ryota's company. Ken wanted to improve Newport, model the downtown area for shifter families to live and hopefully bring more werewolves to the pack. He wanted to develop the area for their kind. Wide open parks, fountains, possibly a hunting ground. If he could get the permits passed by the city council. You forgot to mention number 4? Beth continued their conversation as she pulled up to her workplace. Scratch your itch. Hey, I need to get home. 4th, you're going to be late for your breakfast meeting with Ryota. I saw the note on your fridge. Shit, I smell like dog and dressed in another shifter's clothes. I can't go. And like this. Ken's heart jackhammered. He'd been so focused on Betty he'd forgotten about his weekly breakfast meeting with his father. One-on-one. Powwow about investments and other shit. No worries. Your suit is in the back and you can wash up in our bathroom. She popped out of the driver's side and unlocked the back-scratching salon he adored while he gathered his stuff from the back of her vehicle. As he passed, she handed him her car keys. Don't have an accident with it. You're the best. He kissed the top of her head. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. He hurried to the bathroom and cleaned the dog smell off his skin with hand dispenser soap. Idol. Beth sang the answer from her desk. You're going to tell me every romantic detail about meeting your soulmate. He hung his head. Not now. He struggled with his tie as he came out. She helped him with the knot. Not now, but over dinner. I'm taking her on a date. Beth jumped up and down, clapping her hands. Where? I'm not sure yet. He slid on his tailored suit coat. Off-the-rack suits never fit his shoulders. She tugged his jacket collar, nearly knocking him off his feet. This is your first date, right? Wide-eyed, he stared at the intense Omega. Yes. When had Beth gotten so strong? Then it's very important you do this right and not duck it up. She didn't swear either. It was annoyingly cute. I'll figure it out. I promise to make it nice. No, she held up her hand. It has to be perfect. Something she won't ever forget. The weight of responsibility on his shoulders threatened to bend his back. He wanted his first date with Betty to be memorable, but he also wanted to live. If he was late for this meeting, Ryota would hang him out the skyscraper window. Again. Leave the arrangements to me. I'll text you the details. What time are you supposed to pick her up? 6. Got it. You're welcome, beta boy. You're the best. He squeezed her in a hug until her back popped. She squirmed free and fixed her hair. Remind Ryota he has a 5 o'clock appointment with Angie. You still avoiding him? Like the plague. She shuffled through some mail, avoiding eye contact. What had happened between them? She used to worship the alpha. Okay. He rushed to Beth's car. His office was just a few blocks down the street, so it only took a few minutes to travel. He spotted a white dragon high in the sky on her way to work. Angie the dragon was the closest thing he had to a best friend. He honked his horn and waved out the window. Ken had been raised in an orphanage until the administration had figured out he was a wolf shifter and handed him over to the pack. It hadn't been long before Ryota decided to adopt him and change his life for the better. He'd gone from a lonely poor brat to wealthy son of the alpha with a huge pack family overnight. All these things combined with his dominance tendencies made having friends difficult. It was probably why Ken was so lenient with Beth. She was one of the few people who teased him. The streets were already lined with parked cars. Luckily, he had a reserved spot by the front door of work next to Ryota's car, which was already parked. That meant he was in his office waiting. Shit. Ken rushed through the forest-like decorated lobby of the shifter-owned company. Plant fronds and branches snapped back in his wake as he made it to the empty elevator before the doors closed. He took the time to stop by his office and grab the latest financial reports, then went to join his alpha. The CEO of Kenichi Incorporated had the top floor of the skyscraper for his office. Ryota sat at a dark oak table gazing out of the ceiling to floor windows, admiring Angie as she flew. She'd been his girlfriend before turning into a dragon, a subject Ken avoided at all cost. One didn't poke a heartbroken alpha unless they wanted to be eaten. Ken set the file on the table next to the coffee service tray and sat across from his father. You smell like dog. Did you adopt more strays? Ryota still watched the dragon. Ken sighed. The dispenser soap hadn't been strong enough apparently. Ryota didn't approve of pets and he didn't approve of his father's choices in women, so they agreed to disagree. Ken poured the coffee, taking his black. Caffeine kept him alert, which he needed to survive this meeting. A shadow fell over the room. Owen, the black dragon of Newport, hovered in front of the window like a terrifying giant hummingbird. He snorted ash at Ryota, who in turn raised his cup to the dragon in salute. I hate him. The ash never touched his alpha since the windows were shatterproof. Owen dived to the street, setting off car alarms and rattling windows. Another normal day in Newport. The butler entered with a trolley heaped with food. Ken's mouth watered as the scent of breakfast hit his senses. The burgers had been just a snack. He waited as the alpha served himself first, then gestured for him to fill his plate. As Ryota ate, he asked, "Why are you late?" "I'm not. I'm on time." He gestured to the clock on the wall to prove his point. "Being on time for you is late. You're normally 10 minutes early." Sometimes he thought working for a dumb alpha would be nicer. Ryota was sharp. All claws and teeth and scrutiny. No wiggle room to fuck up even a little bit. He made Ken's life difficult, but it was never boring. He hesitated, not sure if he should tell Ryota about Betty just yet, considering his foul mood. Ryota's stand regarding half-breeds reflected the rest of the country. If they couldn't shift, they were legally human and not pack. Ken knew Ryota had been grooming him as his heir since the day they met. Claiming Betty wouldn't be easy, yet not saying anything could be misunderstood. Ryota and the pack might think he was ashamed of Betty. That was the farthest from the truth. He'd been searching years for her and wanted to shout it from the rooftops. Eyes focused on his alpha, never letting him out of his sight. "I met my soulmate this morning." Ken shoveled eggs in his mouth. Ryota set his silverware aside. "Congratulations. Who is the lucky she-wolf?" His wolfish smile always set Ken on edge. It made Ryota look on the verge of attack. "She's from out of town and owns almost home animal rescue." Ryota's smile faded. "Betty Newman?" Ken's fork of spicy potatoes hung midway to his mouth. He didn't know her last name. He hadn't asked. "Nice. How many Bettys could own a dog shelter in this city?" "You know her." He fought a growl building in his chest and shoved more food in his mouth before dangerous words popped out. Exactly why did Ryota know his mate's name and who she was? The alpha was a known player. Ken had witnessed it firsthand as a parade of females went in and out of their home as he had grown up. Ken would skin his alpha alive if Betty had been one of his women. Their family ties wouldn't matter. "She's a half-breed that can't shift from the Riverbend pack." "You must be mistaken. Soulmates are always shifters, not human." He set his fork down, unable to control the growl in his voice. "How do you know her?" Ryota raised his eyebrow. Her alpha was worried about her mental state when she left the pack. "He asked me to keep an eye on her." Ken's growl turned into a cough. "Oh." Ryota leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Does she shift now?" "Not that I know. She'd admitted to being unable to change shape, but father had a point. Only shifters could develop into soulmates." "Did she admit to being human?" "Yes, but that doesn't change anything. She smells like a shifter." His vision glazed over at the memory. "And like mine." He couldn't wait to see her tonight and bury his. Ryota banged the table with his fist. "Snap out of it." Ken blinked, clearing his mind of Betty dreams. "I can't allow this mating if she can't change shape." Ryota rubbed his temples as if fighting off a headache. "What are you thinking claiming her as a soulmate? Like I don't have enough issues to deal with." He bared his teeth. Not in his version of a pleasant smile this time. "Every human with a drop of shifter blood will be demanding pack rights across the country if I allow you to claim her. The other packs will fucking descend on us like a nuclear warhead." Ryota jumped to his feet, crossing to Ken's side of the table. He rose to meet the attack, heart in throat. "I'm not giving her up. We just met. I haven't even had the time to find out her last name." Ryota paused. "Can she smell it? The soulmate bond." Ken grimaced. "No." The alpha snarled. "The dragon I have no control over, but you." He smacked Ken upside the head in the same place Betty had. "You should know better." His head ached from the abuse and the drugs and the lack of real sleep. Ryota straightened his jacket and smoothed his dark hair in place. "You've wrecked my appetite." He returned to his seat and sipped coffee. Ken had wrecked his own as well. If Ryota didn't acknowledge Betty as a shifter, she would never be considered his soulmate. He could claim her as a human wife. It was mocking what they had, something rare and special, but Pack. Well-being came first. You stink of rebellion. Ryota stared out the window. Ken leaned back in his chair and rolled the tension out of his shoulders. You're an excellent beta. Ryota kept sipping his coffee. The Pack loves and respects you. We'll all be unhappy if you break the law. Take the girl as a lover. He grimaced. Even a wife. Leveling an amber glare in Ken's direction, Ryota fisted his clawed hands. The muscles in his shoulders expanded, straining the seams of his expensive tailored suit. Not a soulmate. Ken thumped his chest. I can't turn how I feel off like a tap. I've never experienced something this strong, and you want me to lie? Nobody is going to fall for it. His alpha massaged the bridge of his nose. Have you told anyone? Ken swallowed with a throat gone dry. Beth. Ryota closed his eyes and counted to 10 out loud. That means everyone in the Pack already knows. He shoved away from the table. If she's truly your soulmate, then Betty must be a shifter. We don't bond to humans. Teach her to change shape. Or. The cold look his father aimed his way chilled Ken to the marrow. The welfare of the Pack always comes first, son. You've cornered me by publicly claiming a human as a soulmate. She smells like shifter. Then prove it before news of this spreads and I'm forced